So if you've gotten your meal, which I think everybody has, and I was assured, given the temperature in this room, that the food is safe and it's been properly chilled. So there's no food safety problems here, Senator Klobuchar, at all. Any event, I'm here just to introduce Senator Klobuchar, who's going to introduce our guest speaker. And I know that she's got Senate business to deal with, but I just want to make a couple of comments about her. A champion for agriculture, and somebody who speaks across party lines, very bipartisan, works with the other side, makes sure that she keeps up the tradition of what our founding parents, I don't say founding fathers, I now say our founding parents had to deal with. She's wearing purple today. I don't know if that's Prince or whatever, but I know that Prince. I said, that's right, you know. But the Vikings are purple also, aren't they? But it's Prince. Any event, but Amy Klobuchar is a star in the United States Senate, and of course her name's been mentioned frequently for higher office, and I'm not going to endorse her today unless she wants it. You know, I just would recall that when I first ran for Congress, my dad had a friend he played cards with who had just come out of the penitentiary for arson. I hate to tell you, the statute of limitations is run. But no. So any event, I saw him as I was walking door to door in downtown Wichita, and he yells at me, Glickman, Glickman. I look at him and my heart starts racing like a mile a minute. He said, I sure would like to help you. You want me to endorse you, or do you want me to endorse your opponent? So any event, but Amy Klobuchar is a real star, and we're delighted that she could come by here and introduce one of her finest constituents in the state of Minnesota. So Senator Klobuchar, welcome to the podium.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, and it is wonderful to be here with all of you. And yes, in fact, a Republican legislator is introducing a bill to have purple be the official Minnesota color. So, but it is mostly because of Prince, but it is true about the Vikings. And this has been a very sad week for our state because it was so Minnesota-like. This, music superstar lived in our state, and everyone just kind of left him alone. He was like the superstar next door, and now he's gone. So it's been a hard thing. But mostly, I want to thank Dan today for his incredible leadership. And not just here, but also with all the work that he's done with the Aspen Institute and other groups and trying to bring people together constantly. And I've so appreciated that. We need more of that in Washington, D.C., where people still sit on the opposite sides of the committee rooms, Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. It reminds me of first grade, but with the girls and the boys. But there are many of us that see that we have to work in the middle, and I appreciate it. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you who's attending today and working every day for food security solutions. Your jobs might not always be glamorous, dealing with, seeds and dirt and vitamins and supply chains, and most of you don't get a whole lot of recognition. But I think we all understand there are people out there that never meet you that are alive because of you, and you have to remember that. You are truly their guardian angels. Everyone here knows that achieving food security around the world is a daunting issue. The United Nations Food and Ag Organization estimates that nearly 800 million people suffer from chronic hunger. The vast majority live in underdeveloped or developing regions, and they often lack sufficient resources to address the problem. As a member of the Senate Ag Committee, I know how important food security is to our nation and our world. I actually was on the first all-women senators trip ever to Africa, 5 women senators with a focus on women in farming. And we were able to see firsthand the partnerships with business and government and USAID and the foundations in America and the work they've done, tremendous work in Africa. Whether it was Fafa Foods, whether it was the woman we visited 2 hours by Jeep in Ethiopia, and we got to her home, and this is something I'll never forget with food security. It was a little hut. Her husband had died. She had 2 children, And she was so proud of her little acre or less than that of teff that she had planted and that kept her family alive. And her home had been all dark until she got one solar panel through the Gates Foundation because of the leadership she had shown in helping with hygiene and helping with health care. And we asked her, well, what are your biggest challenges? And this is a woman that would walk an hour and a half every day back and forth to get water. This woman alone with 2 kids, her only light now so her kids could do her homework, the solar panel. And she said, I have no challenges. And she points to this little Gates Foundation leadership chart that shows her in the middle with these huts around her with little stars. If they had gone to their doctor's baby checkups, she said, I have no challenges. I am a leader. And that is what the work you're doing. It's not just supplying food to the world, but it's also allowing people, empowering them to lead themselves. And we're very pleased that the Global Food Security Act, codifying the Feed the Future program, passed through the Senate, and we will continue to work on those important issues. So my state, the state of Minnesota, knows a thing or two about innovative partnerships. And one of our best examples of that is a farmer-owned co-op. That sounds really small, doesn't it? It's not that small. Land O'Lakes. Now, you may best know Land O'Lakes by their butter, right? As we like to say in Minnesota, to paraphrase Garrison Keillor, Minnesota is a state where the women are strong, the men are good-looking, right, Chris? And all the butter is above average. So in any case, Land O'Lakes has long invested in the communities where its members live and work, but in a world that's growing more connected all the time, Land O'Lakes also understands that fighting hunger and boosting development is just as important in Ethiopia as it is in Arden Hills, Minnesota. Since 1981, they have been using their expertise to help farmers in developing countries access markets and improve the quantity and quality of their yields. In Bangladesh, for example, Land O'Lakes worked with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and 2 local food processors to create nutritious cereal bars made from local ingredients. In the course of 1 year, 17 million cereal bars were produced and distributed as a snack to incentivize 100,000 children to attend school. Can you imagine that? In impoverished areas of the country. Land O'Lakes also provided technical assistance that helped farmers improve their post-harvest handling, and the food processors boost their manufacturing processes. By last August, 5 years later, 20,000 farmers were employed as a result of the program. Their incomes have increased by $100 per year on average, which is significant in a country where the per capita income is only $550. This is just one example of how Land O'Lakes is using their farm-to-market agribusiness expertise to help not only transform lives through improved health and nutrition, but also to boost local economies and create robust markets around the world. Between 2010 and 2014, Land O'Lakes International Development Division supported nearly 1 million rural households, helping more than 200,000 farmers adopt improved farming techniques, and boosted more than 1,300 organizations. The impact of Land O'Lakes has grown and grown under their current president and CEO, and the one we are honoring today, Chris Policinski. Okay, so I like his last name because it's harder to pronounce than mine. Okay, that's good. And I also note, if played right, it's one of the only CEOs in America that you can get 65 points on the Scrabble board. Okay, so Chris has more than 35 years of experience in the food industry and has been with Land O'Lakes since 1997. He has served as board chairman of the National Council of Farmer Co-ops and the Innovative Center for U.S. Dairy, and as board vice chairman for the Grocery Manufacturers Association. He's also on the board of directors of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, a position that allows him to tackle global challenges directly. In his words, feeding a hungry world is both an obligation and an opportunity. It's an obligation because we can't simply turn our backs on hundreds of millions of hungry people, no matter where they are. But it's also an opportunity. a chance to help American businesses succeed around the globe and to find new markets for American goods. I know that one of Chris's heroes is someone I also admire, and that's the late Dr. Norman Borlaug. Borlaug was originally from Iowa. Is anyone from Iowa? Okay, all right. I just guessed it. Okay. But he also graduated from the University of Minnesota as a gopher, where he did a lot of his research. So in my mind, both states can claim him. In the minds of those from Iowa, only Iowa can claim him, but it's not really true. Okay. Borlaug saw people around the world suffering and used science to spark the Green Revolution and save more than 1 billion people from dying of hunger. Well, today we face challenges just as overwhelming as those Borlaug faced. As the world's population grows and more people rise from poverty, so too does our need for food production. It is estimated that we'll need to produce more than twice as much food as we do today to feed 9 billion people in 2050. Meeting this challenge is going to take all of us, our universities, our policymakers, and our scientists. But it's also going to take great American companies like Land O'Lakes. And I'm glad that leaders like Chris are embracing this challenge. Please welcome Chris Policinski.
Oh, that was really nice. Thank you. Senator, thank you for those wonderful comments about agriculture and that very, very nice introduction. It's very appreciated. I don't know if it's deserved, but it's very appreciated. I have to echo what Dan said about Senator Klobuchar, who has to race back to the Senate to do some, this is a work day for Senator Klobuchar, but the Senator has been a champion for agriculture. And I will tell you, she's been there through thick and thin. She is not afraid to roll up her sleeves and engage on tough issues, difficult issues, and she really engages with fact and science as the bedrock of where she takes her position. I'll also tell you, she's one of those senators who reaches out and tries to listen and learn from a lot of folks. Senator, you may not remember this, but 3 or 4 years ago on another issue, not the one we're currently working on, I was driving home at night, I don't know, 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and my phone rang in my car, and I'm thinking it's my wife asking for dinner. And I answered the phone, I said, hi. And she said, Chris, it's Amy. And I said, Amy. And I said, oh, Senator Klobuchar. But the punchline of that is 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night here in Washington, D.C., on an issue that probably was one of dozens that the senator was working on. She took the time to call and ask for Land O'Lakes' opinion and input on that issue. And I don't think any story talks about the senator in any better regard than that. She is fully engaged, and she is a champion for agriculture. So, Senator, thank you very much. And thank you for taking time out of your busy day. I also want to thank the Chicago Council. I only have about 12 minutes for comments, and I promise I'm going to stay pretty close to that timing. But I want to thank the Chicago Council for convening this broad group to talk about food and agriculture, because one of the messages I'm going to deliver today is that we need to do more of that. We need to mix it up in agriculture. One of the observations that I've got after 35 years in this business is we do a great job talking in silos. The CPG food firms are terrific at thinking about market segments and engaging consumers. Production agriculture is great at telling the great productivity story, and increasingly how that's actually a great sustainability story. NGOs, many of you in this room, can do a brilliant job describing food security or food insecurity in parts of the world that are really desperate. Academia might have the best perch of all of this and does a wonderful job educating our future leaders, but they do that in their silo. And what the Chicago Council is doing is mixing it up. This food industry is a broad industry. It may only represent, and the often cited number, 1.4% of America farms, down from 25% or so in my grandfather's generation. But you know, end to end, when you add up rural America, farmers, rural school teachers, vets, the folks that support agriculture, bankers, we're well over 25% of America. And we've got to get out of our silos. We have to mix it up. And by the way, it's sloppy because not everybody agrees with everybody. That's good. That's how we'll enrich the discussion around agriculture. That's how we'll develop more creative solutions to the daunting challenges we face. And I'm an optimist. I believe we can meet the challenge in front of us to nearly double food production with very limited resources in the next 30 years or so. But we have to get out of our silos. We have to enrich the discussion because, in fact, the discussion we have around food right now is bluntly superficial. Superficial. Senator Klobuchar was very generous in describing Land O'Lakes, and most of you think of Land O'Lakes as the butter company. And indeed, that's true. We were formed in 1921 by upper Midwest dairy farmers who produced a high-quality product, butter from sweet cream. It was much better than butter from sour cream. I don't even know what that is, but that was what was available in the population centers of Washington, D.C., New York, Boston, Philadelphia. The problem is these smallholder farmers, not unlike what we see in the developing world, by the way, had no bargaining power. They could not get their product to market profitably. So, simple but powerful idea, they formed a marketing company called Land O'Lakes to aggregate their supply, gain power in the channel, and market their output. I thank the first managers of the company because if we stood for quality, they were ruthless in enforcing quality standards around what we now would call a network supply of dozens of small creameries. They were smart enough to put a brand on it. The product really was better. It took off like a rocket. A few years later, in the late 20s, those farmers said, that worked. You did a nice job aggregating our supply. What if you aggregated our demand? And you bought things better than we can buy on our own. We formed a feed division and later a crop inputs division. If you turn the clock forward nearly 100 years, those are still our three main divisions. We're a Fortune 200 company. All of those divisions are about $5 billion in sales each, but we're still farmer-owned. And by the way, it sounds corny to say, but as an outgrowth of our rural values, our farmer ownership, as the senator said, nearly 40 years ago now, we got involved in global development. 2 CEOs ago, a very wise decision was made that farmers help out their neighbors, but let's define the neighborhood as the world. So I tell you that story because I want you to know Land O'Lakes is pretty opinionated about food supply. We are one of the rare firms that actually sees every day of the week the food industry from end to end. We wake up thinking about seed, crop inputs, animal agriculture, animal feed, and all the way through the end of the chain of highly branded consumer goods. We're still farmer-owned. That hasn't changed. And our view of the food industry is fundamentally shaped by what Senator Klobuchar described. In fact, some of my comments today are shaped less from my perch as a CEO of a Fortune 200 company and more by a recent visit I had to Africa, Kenya and Rwanda, where I saw firsthand the challenge around food security. So what do we see from this perch? 3 things. I'm not going to talk about the first 2, but they're worth commenting. We see, first of all, the discussion in food is superficial because by and large we've operated in silos. There is, in fact, right now a war on science in much of the discussion around food. There are not bad people engaged in this discussion. There are folks that just don't know that we enjoy the safest, most abundant food supply in the history of mankind right here, right now in the United States. That we're growing more food, more productively, which is more sustainably, than we ever had in our history. We're growing 6.5 times more corn on 13% fewer acres than my grandparents' generation. Want to talk sustainability? Let's talk sustainability. They don't know that, though, and they don't know the drivers of that great productivity story are agriculture in all its forms. Small farmers with great innovation, large farmers applying new tools and new technologies. We need to stop the war on science to continue the great productivity story. The second thing we see, and it relates to the first, so much of our discussion about food and food security is shaped by the views of a rich country. I'm a capitalist. I am for market segmentation and product differentiation. But we in the United States and developed Europe need to be very, 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 there's 3 very's there, careful, that we don't impose a rich country's view around food security. Believe me, we sell some pretty high-end products here in the United States, and those have consumer utility. But that should not be the coin of the realm as we think about food insecure parts of the world. The third thing we see, and this is what I am going to talk about, is that we're failing in attracting the best talent to our industry. We just did a study. Land O'Lakes commissioned a study to look at college graduates and find out what they're most interested in terms of careers. 3% of recent college graduates have an interest in going into agriculture as a career. 3%. Why is that? I'd contend because we've been in our silos, that we've talked about agriculture in a way that's counterproductive, that we haven't highlighted the grand purpose of agriculture, which is to feed a hungry population. A lot of folks go to bed hungry right now, and we're soon to have 9 billion people on the planet that we got to figure out to feed. That's a pretty noble purpose. We haven't talked about it as a grand challenge. How are we going to do this with limited land, limited water, limited resources? Let's be honest. You all know the issues. 12% more land, maybe half of that can be brought into production. Climate variability? Think about the role technology plays there. We haven't talked about this as an entrepreneurial business. We need farmers of all shapes and sizes. We need small farmers to be the incubators of the next great idea. We need small farmers in cities to get involved with growing food, in part for the food and in part to see that it's tough to grow food. And that food is a biologic process. Food growth is a biologic process subject to weather. Disease comes. Too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold. What do you do with your crop when a disease comes? So we haven't talked about agriculture as this grand industry with a noble purpose that's entrepreneurial, that's technology-driven and enabled. We've talked about it in our silos. And the proof is in the pudding. 3% of recent college graduates want to go into this great industry, which I think is the greatest growth industry of our generation for the reason I just said. So what do we need to do about it? Well, I'll tell you, in the interest of time, I'm going to shortcut to the Land O'Lakes story of what one company's doing. Because we didn't get into this situation overnight. We got into it over years. And no one of us is going to get out of this situation. All of us are going to get out of this situation by telling the great story of agriculture in our own way. So at Land O'Lakes, in part because we have the luxury, and I say it that way, of being farmer-owned, we've said we better step up our game and not just talk about the issues that I've just mentioned, talent in particular, do something about it. So we engage here, the Chicago Council. We engage here in Washington, D.C. We were here last week with a group called Planet Forward that brought in the 98% that's not involved in agriculture, particularly young folks off of college campuses, to talk factually and inform the discussion. Not resist the discussion, inform the discussion. We think it's great that consumers want to know where their food comes from. Let's look at that as an opportunity, but now let's step up and do it. Let's engage in that opportunity. Let's treat it as an opportunity. We've also stepped up our engagement on college campuses. We opened our wallet. We gave the University of Minnesota a $25 million grant over a few years to build awareness of agriculture. And yes, we have a dog in this fight of Land O'Lakes as a place to have a great career. We did a similar program, a shorter duration with Purdue. We launched our own Global Food Scholars program. That program is pretty simple in design. Looking at Lydia Botham, the head of our foundation who runs this program for us, we take 10 undergraduates per year from 5 target schools, University of Minnesota, Purdue, Iowa State, George Washington, and Northwestern. We have a deliberate skew away from kids that grew up on the farm. We have some, but we want to get that great student out of the engineering school, out of the business school, out of the law school, out of the School of Public Health to be interested in agriculture. And we give them a year-long internship with a capstone project for them to come back and tell us how they would solve the challenge of growing enough food in an increasingly sustainable way to feed the soon-to-be 10 billion people on the planet. The first thing we do is we take them to Africa. We have them visit some of the projects that Senator Klobuchar described. We then bring them to Washington, D.C. Because believe it or not, we enjoy the safest, lowest cost food supply on the planet, in large part because of wise regulation and legislation that has historically been based in fact and science, not opinion, nostalgia, or politics. And we let them see that firsthand. We take them out to the country. Novel idea, to visit with farmers. We take them to some really big farmers. We take them to a farmer in northwest Indiana that has over 20,000 milking cows on their operation. And their first perception of that farm is, oh my gosh, this must be a bad place. Until they look objectively at the measures of animal welfare, until they see the methane digester that powers the dairy, that captures all of the gas to power the fleet, that sells the fertilizer to the local Walmart. Then they look at objective measures of food safety as measured by somatic cell count. And I had one student say he must have slipped a decimal place. He didn't. Then they look at cost. And they leave that farm with a very different opinion of large-scale production agriculture. Then we take them to some small farms. We say, you know what, size isn't the variable. We need farms of all shapes and size. What do you think about this small farm? We bring them to our headquarters location so they can see what we do from farm to market and how we manage our business. And then we ask them for their capstone project. Without being specific, I will tell you to a person, and I got to know all 10 of these folks from our last year's cycle. Wherever they started, in terms of perception around food and agriculture, was not at all where they ended up. Now you might say it's 10 people. Good luck with that. I'll tell you it's a lot more than 10 people. This is a competitive program. By and large, we're getting the thought leaders off those campuses. They influence their friends. And by the way, it's not just to our surprise, the students who got influenced, the faculty sponsors who come along with the students on these adventures, had some of the same questions. Simple story. My point, not that Land O'Lakes is any smarter, we're not. And I hope no one takes it that way. But our perch, because we have this crazy portfolio, which on a bad day gives me gray hair, because we have 3 sets of competitors in food, feed, and crop inputs, 3 sets of industry associations in food, feed, and crop inputs. I listened to Senator Klobuchar and I thought, oh my gosh, I sit more on industry boards than I do my own company. So the downside of our portfolio is we're spread thin. The upside of our portfolio is we see the connections. And the fact that we're farmer-owned and we've been doing global development for 40 years, we see the importance of getting this right. By the way, we have to get all 3 of these things right. If we don't stop the war on science and inform some spectacularly uninformed folks in a pleasant but assertive way, we will not continue the great productivity story. We will not continue the great productivity story. If we don't start to think about the reality that rich countries can think about food and have choices about food in a fundamentally different way than poor countries. It's just a progression. I meant what I said. One of the reasons we're successful in global development is that's kind of how we started our company in the 20s. Aggregate supply, link that to a market, make it economically sustainable. Train farmers around productivity. Might be really low tech. But we've got to have this more robust view of the food industry. And most importantly, we've got to have the leaders. 3% of college graduates being interested in agriculture is failure. By the way, in that same survey, we said, what are you interested in? 20% interested in health and wellness. Maybe I'll get a job in the healthcare industry. 20% interested in technology, high tech. 20% interested in education. What better place to engage in precision agriculture? Our crop inputs division is enabled by satellite technology that maps biomass in real time. And we help farmers grow things by in-season management tools that allow them to optimize the agronomics, the economics, and the sustainability. That's a high-tech solution. We're a big data company. Health and wellness, what's more fundamental to health and wellness than food and nutrition? I'll celebrate the day when small farmers are the incubators of the next novel boutique crop that might not have a mass market but treats a disease condition. We're not that far away from it. We're far away from it mentally. Technically, we're not that far away from it. And in terms of education, in large part, that's how we have the discussion which I've described, maybe provocatively, as being superficial right now around food. We haven't done a good job engaging consumers to get the social license to do the things that I've just said. That's education. What a great place to have a career. Daunting task? Absolutely. Stakes are high if we get it wrong. But I will tell you, if each one of us goes back to our own company and takes your version of what we did at Land O'Lakes, these sound like big strategies. To be honest with you, we kind of stumbled into them. We said, what better place to recruit high talent to support our company growth than align with some great partners like the University of Minnesota, Purdue, Iowa State, Northwestern, George Washington. Well, great. And then we said, oh my gosh, we're doing more than just recruiting, we're educating. Which led us to a discussion of how do we get undergraduates and thought leaders involved to help them tell us what's on their mind. By the way, we've learned a lot. And have them engage in a discussion that I can't engage in as CEO of a big company. Believe it or not, I'm not welcome on some of those campuses in those discussions. Those students are. They can carry the message forward. So thank you for your time. I think I've hit my 12 minutes. I really do appreciate being invited. Evo, thank you for all the Chicago Council is doing to broaden the discussion and mix up the debate. Thank you very much.
I just got a note, Chris, that there are 35 universities here who are waiting in line to get your next series of grants that weren't mentioned, so you'll take care of that for them. You know, I can't help but think, years ago, I used to be involved in the motion picture industry, and some of you may remember the movie The Graduate. And remember when Dustin Hoffman's father-in-law gives him some advice about, the kid doesn't have any idea what to do with his life. And remember the advice that he got from his father-in-law? Plastics. Some of you are too young to remember that. But I do agree with you. I think food and agriculture are the plastics of our generation, except more enduring even than that. And the other thing I say is none of this happens without leadership. I mean, the key is leadership at all levels, the business level, academic level, political level, and you're showing the leadership at Land O'Lakes, which has to be done. And nothing can happen without leadership. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for the President of the United States or a president of a company. It could be at various levels where people do get engaged. So we're delighted that you could speak to us today. And it was a great message, and I think it really will inspire people here in this room. So with that note, I want to thank Senator Klobuchar and Chris for their insightful remarks. The afternoon session will begin promptly at, what is the time, do you say? 1:40. So join us back in the atrium hall to continue the discussion, and there'll be announcements in the atrium for guests to take their seats. Thank you very much. Thanks for all being here.